Appreciate everyone joining in. This is the October 2022 Electric Railroaders Association monthly meeting. I only have a couple of announcements I wanted to make. One is that the annual meeting of the ERA is coming up. That meeting is Friday, November 4th. And if you go to the website, any current members, I believe there's still a couple of spaces left, but any current members can go to erausa.org, to the ERA website. If you scroll down, you'll see annual membership meeting. A reservation is required. It's free to members, but if you still are interested in going, you can attend. It will be at Manducati's restaurant in Long Island City. And we'll have Jerome Horn, who is the Director of Transit Leadership Development at the Transit Center, who will be giving the keynote presentation at the meeting. I've known Jerome for a while. He's a compelling speaker. For those of you on social media, if you follow Jerome, he has a pretty significant presence and some, I think, very insightful opinions about public transportation. And he's interested, both in the history, but also very focused on the future of the public transit industry. So should be a good program and a good annual meeting. The next announcement is the folks from the East Penn Traction Club. I believe Richard Allman is on. Had a couple of announcements they wanted to make. Richard, if you're on, feel free to unmute and make any announcements you wanted to make.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Sorry, going to miss you. You guys aren't doing your program tonight and that you stiffed us, but this happens. Just one quick announcement. Our East Penn calendar 2023 calendar is now available. It is $10.50 per copy plus shipping, or $6 for $50 plus postage and handling. You can check the details at eastpenn.org. Plug for a couple of our fraternal organizations. I think the PTM bookstore has it in stock, and BSRA has it for members of that. Thanks, Paul.
Great, Richard. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other announcements before we begin the program?
Yeah, Paul, I just checked the database for the reservations for the annual dinner, annual meeting. We've got 43 so far, and we're limited to 50, I believe. Okay. So there should be 7 openings left.
Great, thank you, Sandy. So yeah, if you're interested in attending, I would go click on it now at erausa.org. Thank you very much, Sandy. Any other announcements? All right, great. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Fredrickson to introduce our speaker and program for the evening. And again, my apologies. We had an issue with tonight's program. It's a long story. I'll save that for another time. But we did have a substitute speaker jump in at the last minute for what I think will actually be a very interesting and compelling program. So, Kristen, if you don't mind doing the introduction, and then while Kristen's doing that, I'm going to go through and mute everyone else, and we'll unmute again at the conclusion of the program for Q&A. All right, Kristen, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. So our presenter tonight is George Gula. George grew up in both Philadelphia and Scranton, developing his trolley interests at a young age in Philadelphia. And after graduating from Penn State with a degree in business logistics, he spent his entire career working in the transit business, first in Scranton and then in Pittsburgh, where he worked from 1975 until his retirement in 2008. He joined the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, where he gives most of his virtual programs these days, in 1975, and he currently serves as an operator and a conductor at the museum. And he also volunteers in the archives and gives plenty of outreach programs, both in person and online. He's also been writing updates for Trolley Fair, the member newsletter at PTM, since 1977. George, if you are ready to share your screen,
well,
you can
I
take it
am.
away.
Let's see here. I don't know most of you, and except for Dr. John Spahalski. He was my transportation professor and in Penn State. And I want to see here, what do I have to do? Oh, I know what I have to do. I have to reshare this. I have to get this started first here. Okay, maybe this will work. Ah, okay. Can you all see that? Can
Yes.
everybody see the show?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. As Kristen said, I did a lot of growing up in Scranton, and there was plenty of electric railway activity out there. In fact, Scranton really in November of 1886 had the very first successful electric trolley line, and it's still called the Electric City today. The Laurel Line was an interurban that was constructed. It was supposed to go all the way from, we'll have maps later, all the way from north of Scranton in a town called Carbondale and down into Wilkes-Barre. Scranton was going to be the focal point. And here are a number of credits here. And you'll see Ed Miller's credit there. Ed was a very personal friend of mine, and I grew up, he told me a lot about the Laurel Line. And my mother told me about kids jumping on the third rail and then falling off and having terrible things happen to them. Now, there was some very early construction of interurbans there, not just the Laurel Line heading south and north, but northwest, there was something called the Northern Electric. And this is shots of the Northern Electric. The bottom's Clark Summit. The top is Chinchilla. It's a big highway there today. And these were built during the big interurban boom, one of the big interurban booms, and I believe there were two. This went from about 1901 to 1904. And some of this, of course, most of you know this, but when I give a program to people that are not familiar with trolleys, who think that trolleys were something they rode on the street in Norfolk, some of this is very important to them. But here's the Laurel Line in its entirety, what it was supposed to be. And I don't know if you can see my, looking to get my mouse going here. Anyway, over on the right, you'll see the town of Carbondale. And that's in Lackawanna County. And all down this valley that's going north and south to Wilkes-Barre and Nanticoke, the major industry was anthracite coal. And the place was studded with mines and coal breakers. And of course, the populations that lived around them, who all needed transportation. And so this Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley Railroad was supposed to go down, and you'll see in the middle, Scranton, lines were supposed to go down to Carbondale and then another line down into Wilkes-Barre. And it would have made sense. The studies all indicated that it would have made sense to go from Carbondale to Scranton first, because this is all in Lackawanna County, and all the business, all the court business, legal business would have taken place in Scranton. But it was a lot harder to do that because there was so many mining obstructions, extra other railroads up there, a nunnery that had to be circumvented, and they decided to build south. That was all private right of way down there. Now, this was all done by something called the Transit Contract Company, and these were New York people. A man named George Lee showed up, and he became the president, but he wasn't until 1902. But he had a lot of influence, and he was a very over-optimistic individual. He decided, instead of running a very good passenger service with local freight, what he was going to do was take freight from Wilkes-Barre all the way up to Carbondale. And he would take that freight from the Lehigh Valley Railroad and from the Pennsylvania Railroad in Wilkes-Barre, and he would just run it alongside the D&H, which was already getting their interchange down in Wilkes-Barre, and he wanted to interchange it with Carbondale. Now, he never really asked the railroads if they would give up about 40 miles of business. And of course, the Pennsylvania Railroad, as we all read, was extremely hostile to interurbans of any nature. This is what was eventually built. It's a 1945 map. And it's essentially what it was in 1902, 3, except for the Manuka branch. Now, you'll look at Rocky Glen, and you'll see Music, and you'll see a switchback branch. That was a freight line opened in 1947. But other than that, the railroad was essentially what you see. From Wilkes-Barre, private right-of-way all the way up through the valley. It did not have very much local business. Here it is in Scranton. And you see on the bottom that you'll see two things. The Crown Avenue Tunnel is a dotted line. You'll see that going right from the shop, swinging over Roaring Brook. That today is the Electric City Trolley Museum's operation through that tunnel, and also the Delaware-Lackawanna Freight. But you'll notice also on top, that little junction with that really weird looking kind of a tight turn. They were going through the slag dumps of the former Lackawanna Iron and Steel, which next to US Steel was one of the largest steel companies in the United States. And swinging off to the right was the main line, a very nice curve, and it was supposed to go down into Dunmore. You'll see the stations at Naog, penciled in, and Myrtle Street, Petersburg, and went over Ash Street and then down into Dunmore. Now it was supposed to continue, swing around in a big horseshoe, head back up the screen and down into Dixon City, where it would follow the D&H Railroad through many of the mining towns, but it never went past Dunmore. Going to the south, the line went down, and you won't see it here, but off to the left, it's going to join the tunnel. Tunnel was opened about 1905. So originally a lot of the Laurel Line trains went over the hill, and Maple Street eventually would be the end of the line for Dunmore. And Dunmore
George.
would be a Y. Yeah.
George, apologize for interrupting. We had a comment in the chat.
Oh, well,
Asking if
okay.
you could use your mouse and your cursor to kind of point these things out on these
Well, I'm
maps.
trying to. I'm not seeing my mouse and my cursor. That's the thing.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't know where it is. I am moving it around and I don't see it flashing on my screen. Is there something I can do on my Mac to, I'd love to point this out. I really would. But I have this mouse. I can go up and down the folks on the side. It's just not showing on my screen, and it's annoying.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody
I'm sorry.
know what I can do to do that, to make it move?
Yeah, I'm a PC guy,
Okay.
so yeah. I got
Yeah,
no
you're a PC guy.
apologies.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of things up on top. I'm sharing my screen. You can see the new share participants. If there was a way to get rid of that, maybe I could share the mouse. I can't. I'm sorry, because I can't do it, and I have been trying. I don't know why it's not functioning the way it should. And, I've had this issue before. So that's why I'm just trying to explain this. But you can kind of see the center terminal. The Dunmore line would come out and go as far as Dunmore. Then it would take a bit back up, and you'll see the Y up there in the center. It would go as far as Maple Street. And this is just the Dunmore line, not the Wilkes-Barre cars, and come back into Scranton, and that would happen later. So here's a shot of what it used to look like. There's the Delaware-Lackawanna and Western Station. You can see that over on the upper right. The bridge carries Spruce Street across. That's now Joe Biden Street. And you'll see a freight house that's sitting over on the right. There's the station. You'll see it sitting on the left to the right of the underpass. And that platform in the middle was a separate set of tracks called the excursion platforms. And they would have special trains leave from there. We're going to take a ride, as Ed Miller would say. Let's take a ride. And you got on at the Laurel Line station. It's now a parking lot along Cedar Avenue. But I can remember when you stood up above on the railroad tracks at the end of the DL&W station platform, and you could still see the concrete loop, this platform loop. They had 3 storage tracks in the center, and this is what it looked like. And the DL&W Railroad, the Lackawanna Railroad, is over on the right. That's all West Scranton behind this big brick building, which at that time was the Lackawanna erecting shops. A lot of their steam locomotives were built and repaired there. It's now owned by the Army. They make, I think, artillery shells. The building on the far left is the freight house, which is still extant. And you'll see some of the freight yard here. And this is what the terminal looked like, shot from the Spruce Street Bridge. Those 2 tracks next to the loop and that had a platform. The excursion platform was there, but they have obviously taken the roof down. And you would leave. Here's one of the Lackawanna locomotives. They had 3 of this type. And you would leave under the bridge. You'd pass through the yard. If you look on the other side of the bridge, you can see the Lackawanna tracks up above. There's the Laurel Line going through the woods. In the back is the shop over on the left. The building on the right was the powerhouse, which unbelievably kept selling some power and producing power for the railroad until about 1948. This bridge in front, crossing Roaring Brook, that was how the Dunmore line would get out of Scranton. And there's a little building underneath this bridge, which you cannot see. That's where the dispatcher hung out here. It's a highway here now. And there's a typical Laurel Line train. There was some coal, but not much. Last of the real online coal mines that it served.
Hey, George, sorry to interrupt again. Had a question come through about the third rail. If it's not covered elsewhere in your presentation, would you mind talking for a few minutes about?
Well, sure.
About the choice for third rail and why this system went third rail.
A choice for third rail. Here's the one thing I have never been able to document. Probably papers that are scattered in the wind. Why did George Lee, the gentleman we mentioned before that was a catalyst for this line, why did he change the original structure from an interurban railway with local freight, figure express cars, and possibly pulling a few box cars? This was a standard gauge line, to a big freight line where they were going to haul massive trains of 40 to 50 cars. They were going to, just conveniently get it from the Lehigh Valley Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad and, bypass the D&H, which would say, oh, fine, we'll give up 40 miles of running and take the freight at Carbondale. Now, there's some mystery there. Even in the Laurel Line papers that survive in Steamtown, there is absolutely no mention of how they got from this nice, well-built interurban railway, which I think could have been very successful, to a freight hauler. And the whole idea was, if we're going to haul 40 or 50 car trains, we need a lot of power. And you just can't get that from trolley wire. And don't forget, this was DC. AC really wasn't a major option here. The third rail was considered the means of power, to provide a lot more power for these heavy trains. That's why they built the third rail. It was an open third rail. It was not covered like you might find in Philadelphia and New York. And because this railroad had very few crossings, people constantly were trespassing. And kids, my mother would say, kids would dare each other to walk the third rail, which was fine unless you started to fall. And then what's the first thing you do? Right? I'm going to grab myself. I'm going to settle myself in. I'm going to touch the ground. I'm going to go zap. The newspapers are full of these kinds of accidents. But that's why they put the third rail down. There was some overhead. Most of the spurs had overhead on it. In Wilkes-Barre, the city council demanded that overhead be put in because of the danger of the third rail. But that's why they did that.
So George, just so I think everyone understands, it sounds like the third rail choice was not so much like in New York. It's on let's say the Long Island Railroad or a New York City Transit or the former New York Central Metro North lines. It's about passenger service and providing closer to like a rapid transit style kind of service. What you're saying though is here it was all about freight, and that's why
it was the optimism of that period of time. Was they're going to give us this freight and we'll run freight and we'll make money. They never consulted the railroads surrounding them to see whether it was something they would be willing to do. And I frankly, why would you give up 40 miles of freight revenue? But once the third rail was down, it stayed down, and it stayed active until August of 1953, when the last electric freight service went. Here's a nice aerial view. It was taken after Hurricane Diane in 1955, but it shows a lot. You can see the Laurel Line terminal in the upper left. and you can follow the line down along Roaring Brook. This is all steel mill country at one time. The steel mill was all through here. You can see the Roaring Brook line, the Dunmore line coming across Roaring Brook and going up on what is now I call it still the Central Scranton Expressway. But that's another road that's been renamed, and it's the Joe Biden Expressway. Joe Biden, President Biden, of course, was a resident there for a while. And you can see the shops down there, and you can see the powerhouse. And all of this has been changed. When they took the Dunmore line and made it a highway, they relocated Roaring Brook, and they got rid of the powerhouse entirely. And certainly the DL has a different trackage arrangement. Here is the shop, A-Tracks. That little dark shelter on the right was where coal was dumped in, and then it was conveyed into the powerhouse. And you can see a crew probably changing. They change crews here sometimes. So, and then you're going to go, you can see the Harrison Avenue Bridge in the back. I'm standing on it now, or the photographer, Ed Miller, is, and it's cutting through that little cut, still there. Nothing really looks very different.
Hey, George, sorry, another question, a very engaged audience. This is good. The question is, was the Laurel Line hoping at some point, presumably, I'm guessing here because of the traffic levels you were describing for freight, were they hoping to sell out to a neighboring steam line? Was that the strategy? Is there any evidence
They
of that?
did try. Originally, Westinghouse was very involved in building this, and they lost their shirt on this. And they did try to sell. They tried to sell it to the D&H, and they tried actually to sell it to the New Haven, which of course connected via the New York, Ontario, and Western to Scranton. And nobody wanted a part of this. They hoped there would be local industry that located along this line, but so much of the industry was already, in bed with the freight lines. They had their connections. And it really, in a sense, became an 18-mile terminal switching line. They got some cars from the Lehigh Valley to deliver. They got some cars from the DL&W to deliver, but there wasn't much of a long haul in here. What was interesting in the early part of the century was that there were these traveling troops, these local traveling troops that used the railroad to have their cars. Their scenery was carried in cars. Their actors were carried in cars. And the DL&W at times delivered these to the Laurel Line, which took them down to Wilkes-Barre. That was one type of service. They did have an express service for express cars that operated until about 1948. They had a freight service or an express service using Adams Express, and that worked fine until after World War I, when the government decided we're going to consolidate all these express systems into one, and that became Railway Express. And Railway Express decided to reroute a lot of stuff via Lehigh Valley and other railroads, the Erie as an example. So then the Laurel Line lost a lot of that business. They got a postal contract eventually, and that made a little bit of money. Here's the crossing of Roaring Brook. Harrison Avenue Bridge has been rebuilt in the last 5 years. They've tried to keep some of the nature of this bridge in place. And you're going to go into the tunnel. This is the Crown Avenue Tunnel, almost a mile long, 4,000, I think, 750 some feet. And it opened about 1905, I think, built in 1904 and 5. And it's straight. It's pretty straight. The trolleys go through here today. Here's the other side. And you can come down here. A lot more stuff growing on the sides of the tunnel. It's not as clear, but it's the south side of Scranton, as they would call it. And we're going to run along Stafford Meadow Brook. And I just put these together because they're about the same, looking in different ways. I remember riding a bike one time and finding the buildings that were still there, these little buildings you see around there, and walking into the tunnel. Not very far. And when I came out, there was a railroad detective, and somebody must have called. And the day or two before, the former shop building, which was abandoned, had a fire in it. So I got yelled at, and he called my mother. And you guys know what that is. Ed did a lot of climbing. We're sitting on the Erie Railroad and we're looking west towards Scranton. And there's that little bridge you saw over Stafford Meadow Brook and the railroad. And there's a beautiful shot of the Laurel Line. The cemetery, of course, is still there. This was an area known as Virginia, and they wanted to put local industry in there, but anything that located here didn't seem to last very long. So, if I had my mouse working, I'd be able to show you my high school. There's downtown Scranton off to the right. And that's my neighborhood down in the center. Scranton, of course, being in this beautiful valley. And I'm sure the freight train came on right after the passenger train left. And that's typical short train, a couple boxcars. They carried a lot of what was known as culm. C-U-L-M. Culm was the residue from mining and coal preparation. And it was a bunch of shale and coal that was sized improperly that wouldn't be you'd be able to be used in stoves, the stove grates, because remember, anthracite burned very hot and it was primarily a heating fuel. And the DL&W passenger trains would use anthracite because it burned cleanly. And there's your Phoebe Snow jingles. Whereas the Lackawanna freight trains, it used bituminous and there was black smoke everywhere. So we're going down the valley today, and right up above today is the Interstate 81. Now behind those trees and on both sides of the valley were quarries where they got the original ballast that ballasted the line. And you go down a little bit, not very far, and there's Connell Junction. Now, that was named for a senator that was also on the board, and it was a local fellow. And you'll see that track, and that track was part of what was known as the over the hill line. If you remember the map I showed you earlier, first the cars before the tunnel had to go over the hill, and they came down here. As the leaves come off the trees, if you guys want to go north, anybody going to Scranton on 81, look off to the right when you cross this huge bridge about halfway between Montage and River Street, you're going to see the right-of-way. The right-of-way becomes the northbound lanes of Interstate 81 today. And here's a typical train load of culm. And they took this culm, and some of it was marketable, and it was shipped offline. A lot of it was used in their power plant. Both the Northern Electric in their plant and the Laurel Line were able to burn this culm, and it was their primary source of power. Some of it was used for cinder block. Now, if you go down and it's pretty wooded, I actually walked down this and left my bike. Isn't it amazing? You can leave your bike and walk 3 miles, and a couple hours later, you come back and you find it's still there. And it's a northbound passenger car. It's also a northbound freight, and probably coming off the Manuka branch. And Ed Miller told me that a lot of times the dispatcher would just tell the freight train that came off the Manuka branch, instead of crossing over, just go north on the northbound track. At the tunnel, it was gauntlet track. And they would just come out, and then it was single track from there into town. This bridge is still there, one set of rails, and it's crossing Stafford Meadow Brook. And if you're riding the streetcar today, you can actually see this area. But it's the northern end of this is very bucolic. There was a substation behind the car at one time. This is Virginia again, and a footbridge was here, and the company hoped to locate some industry here. It never happened. In 1947, when an industrial park was built higher up on the mountain to the left, you'll see a switch right there. That's a switchback. And when the locomotives left that switchback, it became powered by overhead wire, and they would pull a train up, push it up, and do their switching. 3 or 4 industries were located up there. I remember walking down here and walking up that switchback, it's kind of like a kid, right? What's this? And then I saw the poles with the overhead wire, no wire, but everything else was there. And I knew there was a trolley line here somewhere, and it would take a long time for me to figure out what it was. Pages cut were below Virginia. And again, you see how beautiful it was. There's a good shot of the overrunning third rail. I've got a couple of those holders, and my wife, I think, thinks it's junk. Maybe some of you have had that experience. I don't know. you're going to get down to this lake. It's a man-made lake, and Rocky Glen Park would be here. And Rocky Glen, has a totally interesting background, which we don't really have time in this show to talk about. I do have another show. It's all black and white. It's all about the construction, and it goes into all the little things in there, including the fact that somebody buried 2 bodies, poor people, I guess, that nobody claimed. And then he said, no, you know, this is the cemetery now, and you have to go around. But the Laurel Line would be a park, and they would come across that causeway, and the causeway is still there. You can't go totally across it because, as you'll see, there was water on both sides at that point. Now there's only water on the left. And this is the roller coaster, one of several here that went over the Laurel Line. The 4 tracks that you're seeing is part of the station. It's after 1921, after the 1921 horrible wreck in Pittston, 5-car wreck, because there's signals in place. But there's the roller coaster going up and down and using some of the natural terrain. This is the more famous picture, and all the fan trips were stopped here, and people took pictures here. Certainly Ed Miller did, of what was known as the $1 million roller coaster. Ben Sterling at that point owned the park, and he built it for a bit under $100,000. This was put in a year of the end of World War II, and it peaked at 96 feet. The trip was almost as long as the trip through the tunnel. It was finally dismantled about 1958 or so, or a few years after the Laurel Line passenger service was abandoned. And we're looking south at the station and the footbridge. You can see some of that roller coaster off to the left. That was the part of the roller coaster that you saw going in the valley. A park is off to the right, and there's some freight cars. You might notice them. The mainline cars pretty much use the center. And although you could pass here, it's primarily the freight trains that use this. They'd park work equipment on it, and there was a small mine just south of here, just south of what is known as Rocky Glen Road. And this is right at the end. It's just a few months before the December abandonment. You can see the signal, and it's still open, but there's no people. And it's pretty dismal here. The platforms were wood, and they eventually were replaced about 1920 thereabouts with just cinders.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
Quick question. And this just maybe a little obscure, but from kind of a regulatory point of view, were they considered a railroad regulated by the ICC, or were they like an interurban regulated by the state? Were they like a part of the general railroad system of transportation, or were they for lack of a better term, a trolley system?
I'm not really sure, because in their records, they sometimes want to consider, when it's to their advantage, they consider themselves a railroad. And they certainly did interchange with 2 or 3 other railroads, the Erie, the Lackawanna, and certainly Lehigh Valley. But there were other times when they argued in court they were an interurban, and they needed they needed something, and it was more advantageous. They did have to submit reports to the PUC every year. I have never seen an ICC report, and it may be that they didn't do that. And that's another obscure area. We don't really know. And if Ed Miller, if I, had the sense to ask these questions, but who is a 16-year-old or 20-year-old has the sense to ask these questions, right? You're dating girls, you're driving cars. I'm down here running trolleys at the museum, and I don't think about it until much later. And that's a really good question, and it's something I still have not answered, and I'm sorry that I can't give you a definite answer. But we're looking north here. There's Rocky Glen, or some of Rocky Glen Park up there on the left. And the top photo, look at those nice shiny new hoppers there. 401's an interesting locomotive. And 401 was built in 1895 by Baldwin Westinghouse, who wanted to experiment with both AC and DC. And in fact, this thing originally was built with a pantograph as well as trolley poles. By about 1905, when the Laurel Line had built their tunnel and now, decided we can run freight trains because we don't have to go up that hill anymore. Westinghouse they were still owned by Westinghouse, and they asked Westinghouse, what kind of an engine should we get? And Westinghouse said, hey, we have one right here for you, which from the records I found required a whole bunch of work to get it back into shape. And then they had an accident with it out here in Pittsburgh where the experiments had taken place, East Pittsburgh, really. And there's a letter saying, we won't get it right away. We have to repair this. But that's the original freight locomotive. And it has been said that that's the first freight locomotive to run in the US. They built 2 more copies of it in their own shops, 402 and 403. And they would run that until August of 1953. And then none of them were saved, unfortunately. The railfan movement probably being what it was, who had money, to buy this stuff. Where do you put it? There's the sidings on the bottom at the south part of that Rocky Glen station. You can see they just had a fire. And there's some of the work cars that's the siding right there, a spur. Excuse me. And they would sometimes put the work train there, and another color shot of it before the fire. And you can see some of the hopper cars that they have parked there, that they probably have pulled out of that mine, that little tiny mine, not very big. And they may have left them there while they go south to do more switching, and they would come back and pick it up. There's no bridge here anymore, but that's Rocky Glen Road, and it was a pretty decrepit bridge. And he's swinging around right around the corner, right past the trees, is this small mine. You'll see it in a minute. Take a look at the roller coaster on the bottom, and you can follow the Laurel Line. And it's going to swing around over the causeway. There's the station. And it's the 1945 roller coaster, not the old one that swung over the station and over the valley. Follow that curve along into the trees, all the way up to the upper, not quite over, but up in the right, certainly to the right of center. And you'll see a coal mine. If anybody, can't see it, let me know. That's a small mine. It was actually at the base of the Gravity Railroad, one of the planes, number 5, number 4. I can't remember right now. It was a really small ramshackle thing. Not like the breakers that you'll see later that totally dominated the valley. This was a tiny ramshackle coal breaker. There was a small mine here off to the side. And of course, after the Avondale disaster in 1865, where there was a fire in the mine and the shaft happened to be located right under the breaker, sucked all the air out, killed over 100 people. A state law, very early state mining law, said you can't have the mine under the breaker. But they switched cars here. And until about 1947 or 8, this was actually one of the few revenue producers along the Laurel Line. Now, you're going to go south a little bit, you're going to cross Roaring Brook, and you can see not the bridge, but you certainly can see the abutments today. And that little part of the bridge over to the left, that was for something called the Springbrook Railroad. When they opened the Laurel Line up, about 1902 or 3, and I'm trying to remember which one, but I think it was 2. The Springbrook Railroad was still in existence, and they had to build that little girder bridge over it. There's the typical water pipes that you see on bridges. I'm standing on the Erie Railroad looking north, and if you look in the back, you'll see that mine that we saw. It gives you an idea of where we are. There's follow the tracks, and you'll see it crossing the Roaring Brook, or not Roaring Brook, but Springbrook is what it's called. Now that road, that you'll see a crossing, a road crossing. Originally, the highway, which is now I think 502, went underneath. You could still see some of that if you wander around, and risk a tick bite. And then I'm going to go under the Erie Railroad. And
Hey, sorry, George, on that previous photo, that looks like a pretty risky picture to take. It doesn't look like there's anywhere to go if an Erie train were to have,
Well, it was a branch line. You know, Ed climbed a lot of this. And he probably knew a lot about the schedules. Believe it was double track up here, but
okay.
you know,
And
he
then,
knew what he was doing.
we had a comment from David Frainer stating that he believes it's probable that they were regulated as a railroad because of the interchange, and they may have interlined not only the cars themselves, but also the railroad rate structure, and the fact that they were standard gauge in Pennsylvania, whereas most interurbans were Pennsylvania gauge in Pennsylvania.
Well, they did have. I've seen interline rates. I mean, they shipped freight out of here, and they would have had to have the proper paperwork. They also had interline tickets though with the Northern Electric interurban going north and the Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton, leaving Wilkes-Barre and going south. I have copies of tickets where you can get on, say at Wilkes-Barre, and go up into Scranton and get on the DL&W. It was a combination ticket. So, you know, and you went to Buffalo sometimes on that. With the Lehigh Valley in Wilkes-Barre, you could come down on a Laurel Line ticket and then use part of that ticket to go up north to Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So they may have very well been regulated, and I'm sorry I don't really know the answer. Because I didn't ask the question, but I have seen these interline rates. They did have rates with a variety of railroads, not just the local ones, but ones out in the Midwest and the West. So they probably were regulated by the ICC. And you know, I love all these comments because, you know, it gives me things to think about and answers to some things. There's that Erie Railroad Bridge, and I'm heading north. I'm looking north in this cut, which you really can't see. They filled it in, and they got a trucking company over all of this today. It's as high as that hill. But in this, about 1923 or 25, there was a robbery of a Laurel Line car. It was a mine payroll. And 5 people got on. The motorman was shot. Certainly the person holding onto the money was shot. There's a road right off to my left, and so these 5 got away with the money and the 6th person, and they were all eventually caught. One was caught out here in Pittsburgh. They did pay for their crimes. We'll go a little farther south. There's Powder Mill Road. That was that road I told you about. It would come up and swing over the Laurel Line. This is southbound car. And Ed did a lot of shooting in the 50s with color. He bought a new camera so that he could shoot color Kodachrome because he knew the line was on its way out. And this is the county line, the division between Lackawanna County and Moosic. And well, that's in Moosic. Luzerne County is the contiguous county. Lackawanna County was actually made out of part of Luzerne County about 1870. It's a northbound car, and you're going to see all this beautiful bucolic line, the nature of this beautiful line turned into this. This is what it's like to live in coal country. And I remember burning dumps, and it looked sometimes like Centralia. Carbondale at one point had a mine fire, and these dumps would eventually be taken down, as you're seeing it, to harvest that coal. Originally, when coal was mined up here, they really didn't have very efficient ways to break it up, and you had to break it up into particular sizes for the stoves that were used to heat the houses. About 70% of what came out of the mine, a mix of slate and improperly sized coal and tiny dusty coal chips would all go into these big piles. And later they found ways to burn this stuff, especially in the Camelback locomotives. The Laurel Line found ways to burn it in its power plant. You found out you could use it for cinder block, and now it was a marketable commodity. And the Laurel Line would buy some of these dumps cheap, and they would start getting the coal, and it would be taken to their power plant to produce electricity. This is in Duryea, Brown's Patch, and these tracks would be moved around. Here's a southbound car coming in, one of the locomotives doing switching here as they mine that culm. Later, this had beautiful rock ballast when it was opened, but much later, the culm was used as the fill. So in the Laurel Line locomotive, when this was abandoned as a diesel operation, people got in there to grab the fill. Here's the substation they built at Avoca. Partway down the line, about 7 miles down the line, and there was a siding here, freight house. You see the roof of that behind these Laurel Line cars. They own these ugly things, and there's culminant, and there's some switching going on. It's pretty good view of the third rail, which people constantly crossed over. Sometimes it was a terrible disaster. One of the worst ones I remember reading about. I really feel sorry. I was a young parent and grabbed this off newspaper.com, and some lady with a baby was traveling, and she wanted a shortcut. She went over the third rail and dropped her baby. And there was a lot of terrible accidents up there like that. So there's the freight station. There's the substation. It's a southbound car at Plain Street. And I was able to find this area. I'm standing on a road, a highway bridge or a road bridge, a local road bridge, actually. And then I'm going to swing through Avoca, and I'm going to come up here to South Avoca Station. And this is one of the only places that they had signals. They were forced to put in these signals. And according to Ed Miller, the third rail was pretty separated. You can see that the angle of that curve, they had to come through, and the signals were going, these flashing lights, and they were blowing horns, trying to coast through. So at least one car would get across on a 2-car train, or the whole single car would get across and eventually hit the third rail again. Otherwise, you'd have to get another car out there to push it. And 81 today is just up to my right on a hill. That's the Wyoming Valley. Now Lackawanna Valley has moved into the Wyoming Valley, and you can see how nice and
George,
wide
sorry,
it is.
a
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
Did the, I know for the Long Island Railroad and other third rail operations, either would carry or at certain locations along the line would have what they called stingers, big cables that you could deploy and attach to the third rail to.
They didn't have
move.
them. But
They
they
okay,
didn't-
that was the question. They did not have them.
They
Okay.
did not have those things. No. It was kind of primitive out here compared to what we see in the New York area, Philadelphia area. They didn't have those. You had to get across by really whizzing across. And they made, according to Ed Miller, who really knew this line, knew all the employees, they made an awful lot of noise. They built this beautiful thing in 1902 down in Avoca. They're on the border of Avoca and Duryea. It's a northbound car, I believe. King Bridge did it from Cleveland, and all the fan trips, of course, would stop on this. You'll see the Lehigh Valley Railroad off to my left. Between the two sets of girders, there's a mine farther off to the left, and then there's the Delaware and Hudson Railroad, and up above is Route 11. So this went and passed over a lot, and then look between that big set of girders, and you're going to see piles of coal. They're the standard dumps that were just about everywhere. When the mine was abandoned, when a tunnel was abandoned, when they put a new breaker up somewhere else closer to a new source of mining, of ore, they left these dumps and they caught fire. And I can remember on rainy days, seeing a little bit of smog and the sulfur in the air. If you had a wooden house, and most people did, you just painted it forever. My dad would take 4 years to paint 4 sides. And by the time he got to the first side again, the paint was peeling off. In the 60s, the aluminum siding people made a killing up here. And if you go through here, tons of people have aluminum siding on their house. The paint just did not last. Not as toxic, perhaps, as the air up here in Pittsburgh was, but pretty bad. We're looking north. There's Route 11, crossing the railroad. And there in the center is a 2-car Laurel Line train heading across the viaduct. And
Another
yeah.
question came in.
Okay, sure.
Were there many, you mentioned, I think, some of the incidents with the third rail. Were there many lawsuits or was there litigation as a result?
Well, hard to say. You know, if you get into newspapers.com, you're going to see everything from a family that lost a kid. And it was a very prominent family, and they would talk about this family and all the things they did. Then there would be another one that said the Polish girl fell on the third rail. A well-known foreigner fell on the third rail. So it ran the gamut, and I don't think the well-known foreigner had the money to do lawsuits. I think there probably would have been lawsuits here. But the question becomes back then, would they say, why in the hell were you on a railroad? You know this is dangerous. Why were you here? I have never found on the newspapers files any successful lawsuits or any mention of a lawsuit. But it was a different time. Why were you on the tracks? You know, like anybody getting hit by a train. Why were you, you lost your leg. Well, why were you trying to hop the train? And I think society thinks very differently now. So I don't know whether somebody decided to do that. The records that have survived don't seem to indicate that. But I don't know where the legal records went to. What's down in Steamtown are more operating records. So there's cars, by the way, on the bottom. That's Lehigh Valley Railroad, which served the Heidelberg Breaker. And don't forget, the railroads had owned the mines. And then when the government said you can't do that, they just established subsidiaries with different names. But they still owned mines. Now we'll leave that breaker. We'll leave that Heidelberg breaker and the viaduct. And you can see some of this right away today as you drive Route 11. We're heading south along Route 11. And now you can see there's no trace of that rock ballast I mentioned. It's a crossover here down in DuPont. And that's DuPont. And by the time the Laurel Line got to this area, you can see where this train is, and you can guess where the station is up here. The major railroads, the Erie, the Lackawanna didn't get down here, but the Erie did, the Lehigh Valley did, and the D&H did. And they had really taken some of the best locations right within the community. So people had to walk up a hill, or walk a little distance to get to the tracks. And this really illustrates that. And this happened to a lot of the valley towns down here. More coal country, really pretty place to be. This was a bridge over Route 11, and it's just over to my left. The car is just south of that. It was a really skewed angle bridge. It was a long bridge because of the angle here. And that is all the residue from the Butler breaker, which had been there in the 1870s. And it was still producing coal in the 1950s. Although at that point it was not owned by the railroads, it really was owned by people that were associated with the mob. There's more of that view. There's Route 11, and that car is a northbound car. But now totally here today is a modern 4-lane highway and a shopping center. All of this has been cleared out, but that's what it looked like. That is the scarred landscape. So the lunar landscape, as somebody told me once. That's what it would look like. But we're heading down into Pittston. Now they're off to my right is the Butler breaker. And you look at, this thing caused cave-ins all over Pittston. In fact, the Laurel Line tracks caved in a number of times. And once they almost lost a train, these mines would just collapse out of nowhere. There's a Laurel Line bus off to the left. The Laurel Line Bus Company was a subsidiary, which not only paralleled the Laurel Line in some places, it did get to serve some other areas. And long after the Laurel Line disappeared, it was bought by the Price Company, and the same colors, the green, yellow, silver, was sitting there all the time at Courthouse Square. I remember it saying Laurel Line. And eventually that line was bought up by County of Lackawanna Transit, and is now part of their transit system up there. But
Hey,
here
George,
we are. Yeah.
one more question.
Sure.
Did Laurel Line ever make enough money to cover both their bonds and their
No,
operating costs?
they had a couple of profitable years, but I wouldn't say very good. And they had several reorganizations. they probably had $8 or $9 million in debt after this road was originally built, and they had to reorganize. I know they had that at one point. They had these 50-year gold bonds, and they were coming due 1948. And along with a strike in that year, it led to the receivers. They were in receivership at that time, to just say, we're going to run the freight service. One of the receivers actually thought what they really needed was to sell to a bigger company at that point, and that would happen. DL&W would buy it about 1955 or 6, and it would be called the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley Railway, and it would be operated by the DL&W as a way to get down into Wilkes-Barre. They had never been able to get into Wilkes-Barre. That was how the DL&W got in there. Here is William Street. That is the station. Not very good looking, but that's what you waited under for a train. It's not the main station in Pittston. It is just North Pittston, right around Pittston Township, where the boundary of Pittston and Pittston Township is. And it's going to go under the Erie Railroad. That's William Street again. That's a typical freight. Some box cars, some refrigerator cars, and cars of calm. Then it's going to go down into this valley. You can't get through here. You know, you didn't need a flamethrower to get down through here now. But it went downhill. We're starting to go into Pittston, and it was open then. See, there's Pittston in the back, and you can see how the track runs. It's going to wind over to the right, then it's going to wind left, and then it's going to come in here. Market Street Station in Pittston is right off to my right, and there's a picture taken here that in somebody's calendar I won't mention, and they call this the Manuka Branch. And I can tell you now that's not the Manuka Branch. We are coming into Pittston. The tracks in front of me are not Laurel Line. They're the Erie Railroad. There's the Erie on my left. There's the Market Street Station here. And behind that was the freight house. The freight house is still there. This, unfortunately, has been torn down. And here, you know, Rocky Glen, we mentioned that, it had a lot of special days. Italian Day, Greek Day, Russian Day. And when the Laurel Line put on extra trains coming out of Scranton, then they would run them as far as Pittston. And just south of that station is a crossover, and they would cross these trains over here. And here we are doing that today. You can walk this today. It's still visible for those that want to do it. Go down a few blocks, cross Pine Street. Then it's going to turn, crossing over the main street in Pittston. This is South Main Street, the Erie Railroad, 2 tracks over there on the left, the Laurel Line here on the right. So they're really 2 sets of bridges. And it's Nickel Day, Rocky Glen. So this is an extra. And it's coming from Plains, which is south of here. It'll run as far as Scranton. So they did serve some of the south population, even though Wilkes-Barre had its own park, San Sui. Here's that bridge.
One more question, George.
Sure, anytime. Any questions that I
Yeah,
can
sorry. Did they have a number? What number of freight customers did they have, and what were kind of the industry?
The industries varied, and they weren't all there at the same time. You know, they had Moffett Coal until about 1937, which one year produced, you know, over 4,000 cars, and next year something like 200. The mines run out, you know, it's a product that doesn't last. That was there, and that went away in 37. There was a couple industries up in Virginia that came in 1905, 6. They would only last off and on 2 or 3 years. They never served any other mines except that little ramshackle thing we saw just south of Rocky Glen, and that lasted until the late 40s. There was I mean, at one time in the early years, there was a brickworks located along the part of the line that was pretty far down. They would have to rebuild it later. I think they were down in there trying to get some business quickly. And they didn't rebuild the regular line as a double track line on a grade until later. There was, at times they served the gas works off and on down in Wilkes-Barre around River Street. And they would at one point in the end serve a warehouse. One of their, in fact, we'll see it, Wilkes-Barre's line, double track line. They made the southbound track an industry spur for a warehouse that a local company wanted to ship furniture. It was a department store. And so not all those industries were there at the same time. They had some stuff in Dunmore in the 1920s. Quinn Coal comes to mind, 1918 to about 1924 or 5. You don't see anything about Quinn Coal after that. So not really. I mean, it was very, very sparse. They did switching in Wilkes-Barre for 3 meatpacking and fruit plants. And that was an expensive operation because, you know, whenever the DL&W delivered a refrigerator car, don't forget, this is before, this was all ice cooled stuff. It was before real refrigeration. They'd have to grab a crew and they'd have to go down and, you know, with 1 or 2 refrigerator cars, 19 miles each way. Not really profitable. So
George, were there
didn't have very
any
much.
breweries on the line?
Any what?
Breweries?
There wasn't any breweries on the line, but there is paperwork to indicate in the early years, they shipped Stegmeyer beer from Wilkes-Barre, which means it would have had to been carted over to the yard along Pennsylvania Avenue. They got meat out of there. They would ship a variety of things that came off the railroads that had to go north. The Lehigh Valley did not have a connection with the DL&W, but they just didn't have a lot. And we get to Wilkes-Barre, you know, there was a freight house down there. It just wasn't very good. They had this interchange. They had 2 interchanges with the Erie Railroad. This is the one in Pittston. So the bridge is just around that curve in the back. And the Erie, which we saw earlier by the Market Street station, and that's an Erie track, by the way, in those trees. You know, they would have an interchange here. They also had one in Dunmore. And this would be the one that lasted. And they'll go a little farther south. There's Erie track again.
Hey,
And
hey, George, sorry,
yeah.
sorry. There's lots of really good comments coming in. A comment saying, with a lot of your pictures, you can see a large number of church spires in each picture, which reflects a lot of second generation diverse immigrant populations.
well, that's true. Don't forget, up here, you know, all the miners, I'm just looking at the miners, you had Welsh and German coming in early, and they had their own churches. You had the Irish coming in, and then you had a whole variety, 1880s, 90s, Eastern European. Not only say I'm Ukrainian, so you had Ukrainian Orthodox, Ukrainian Catholic, you had Polish churches, the Slovak National Church, the Polish National Church. There were a ton of churches up here. I think there were some Baptist churches, certainly Presbyterian, Lutheran. And this is an era when most people went to church. You know, church was not just a few people there at Easter. It was crowded all the time. And yeah, these pictures show all these buildings. And some of these buildings have been converted to other uses. Like out here, you can eat in churches that are now restaurants. This is South Pittston, and we're at Plank Street. And here's a train heading down, probably for Combe. He's heading southbound. Look, it's all empty, or mostly empty.
Hey, George,
And-
on that previous picture, there was a car underneath the underpass. And the question was that Ed's yellow car?
Wait, which one? I don't know. I don't even know what he drove. To
Okay.
be honest with you, where's that yellow car? That, I don't know. I don't know what he drove. I don't know. I was 16 when I first met him.
And then another question for this picture: what does the X above the road number hold?
Everybody's asked me that, and I've asked other people, and I don't think anybody knows. Now, I don't know what it meant. I don't know if it was a safety feature. The people that by the time I was getting that question asked, the people who knew it were dead. Now,
I assume it
maybe,
means the locomotive does not have PTC.
don't know, the locomotive. Finally, they had signals on here in 1921. This was an area just south of here. There was a right in here, horrible 5 train. Let's see, 5 cars. One train, had an issue, and they had sent some expresses north, and the train going north, they were backing it up, trying to transfer people, and one other train came and hit it. Somebody else hit it then, and this is just after. I'd have to go through all that detail. I can't remember. When you're 71, it's hard to remember everything, unfortunately for me. But the thing was that the Laurel Line earlier that year, I know, had been, they had been struggling to figure out how much insurance they could buy or should buy. And they decided, well, we don't need that much. We never had anything happen that was terrible. And they had a car telescoped here. It was a wooden car, and a steel car went into it, and a great loss of life on the 4th of July when a lot of trains were running, extra trains running back and forth to the park. And when we're done with this show, I probably have slides sitting below the end of the show, and we can talk about that. I can go down. And this is what it looks like heading south out of Pittston, just these little bridges, little tiny dinky roads, and you can see the calm fill. You can see those trees in some cases are growing, as you can see, out of culm. I mean, they've been able to seed in the coal. And, so that area where the buildings are, where the curves, that's where we were. Now we're here. We're down at Ewan crossover. Ewan was a colliery named, it was a station named for the nearby colliery or coal breaker. This is covered with homes today. I used to bother my wife incessantly because I kept wanting to find this area. That's the Erie Railroad, and also a coal mining railroad going underneath that bridge. And one day she said, "Give me the wheel, I'll drive," just like that. So we did. And there were these beautiful homes, and the guy's mowing his lawn, and I can see one of these bridge abutments, the one closest to us. Went in and asked him if I could take a picture, and I went back, and there's still rail back in there and everything. And as I went out, he said, "You see that bridge behind the car, 2 pole sets behind the car?" He said, "I had to take down that concrete abutment too to build his house." But this is totally changed. And there's a mine back over there. You can see it back on the right. Here's the Ewan breaker. We're looking west. That car is a southbound car, same bridge. And there's all the coal detritus that's coming up. You can see some of the conveyor where it would process the coal and then get rid of the slate, get rid of the coal that was mixed in with stone that they couldn't use. There was I believe you'll see it here. There was a mine pool here. Water was being pumped out of the mine, and it was here. And this was Ed's favorite picture, Ed Miller's favorite picture. Northbound freight train being given permission to run north on the southbound track. It's of course cars passing it. That's why they did that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. I mean, Ed really knew how to capture the surrounding area. That's the now former Pittston Hospital. Cars heading south. There's number 6 pond over there, the pool we just saw, the bridges. And we're going to go. I have black and whites through here, but I don't have too many. But there he is, northbound. You can see what it looks like. There's Erie Railroad tracks. The Erie Railroad serviced the mine. There's the pond. And
George,
yeah.
there's some speculation that the X on the locomotives might indicate non-passenger equipment.
Oh, really? I never saw that on any of the freight equipment. It's only on the locomotives. Huh. I don't know. I have to be honest. I don't know. And I'm sorry. There's the hospital again. There's the Erie cars. That's pretty much what living in a coal region looks like. There's some of the churches in the back again. And we're going to come through this whole area, this barren, desolate place. And it's a good view, though, of the third rail. They're ceramic holders, ceramic chairs rather. And you can see they were always on the inside. Didn't prevent people from getting killed.
Is this an area they would move the tracks around too?
No, this is the main line. The mine dumps are surrounding the main line. They would not have to move anything here. The Laurel Line stayed here and did not serve the mine. The mine was served by the Erie. All these mines had been here, for decades, and they had their arrangements with the railroads. And then, like I said, in many cases, the railroads had these subsidiaries that they had to create, but they were still associated with the railroads. The ICC, I think it was, it said, well, you can't really mine it and haul it at the same time. Oh, just, interlocking board of directors, same boards of directors, but they all had their interchanges lined up. We'll look the other way at some greenery. There's the Susquehanna River. So the Lackawanna River has already poured into the Susquehanna, and this is what's called Increment. Along Market Street. It's all apartments here today. You can't find it. There was a park here at one time called Valley View. You can't see any trace of it. It was one of those picnic parks that really had no amusements and really didn't survive through the 20s. The Depression really killed it. And now we're heading south from Increment to number 14. Number 14 was not an original station. It was one that was put in when they opened a new mine shaft. And of course, you had to get the workers to their jobs. Here's the refrigerator cars, one box car coming out of Wilkes-Barre, 2 hoppers. That was a typical Laurel Line freight, and it didn't make a lot of money, as you can see. This whole area would constantly cave in. In fact, the mines would sometimes tell you, we're going to be undermining, undercutting under here. It's going to fall in. The Laurel Line would have to put out watchmen, or at the very least, slow orders, because tracks could just cave in. And if you were living there in a house, your house could just cave in too. You did not have the rights underneath. Here's number 14, and all these stations were kind of like this. Not very. Now there was an industry just south of here. And we're going to look at it. The original main line was down here with the hopper cars at one time. They didn't put grade in here for a while. And then there was a brickworks down here, as the main line is up there, and there was a brickworks. Then this became this little coal dump. And we're going to take a look at it. And the Laurel Line would bring a couple hoppers in, empties. Then they would go pull out the loads. It's a pretty steep grade, but an electric car can do this. So they would back those cars up there and then pull out. You can see how they got the coal here. It was dumped by trucks from another area, and it was coal and calm. They got both out of here. So then they would just now the employees, they parked the cars here on this grade. Then they pulled out the full ones. The employees would run the car down using gravity, not the Laurel Line employees, but the employees of this little coal operation. If you want to be nice and say that. You can see how steep that grade was. And I've thrown these black and whites in because Ed covered this very, very extensively with black and white. And then we're going to go south, and we have just crossed Main Street, North Main Street. This is called Hilldale. And I chopped my way through that in the background beyond the bridge one time, and it was hard, and that's before I understood there were ticks out there, but I guess I didn't get bit. I don't know. And we're going to swing around Main Street, and a ton of houses here today. It's all been redeveloped. You can't see this. And then this is gone too, the bridge over Main Street. This is called North Main, and we're in the borough of Plains, which originally was called Hancock. It was always named Plains, but Plains wanted you to call it Hancock. And you can see that bridge in the background. And Ed is sitting in the substation up here and freight house in Plains. That's one of the Laurel Line owned wooden boxcars. Their equipment was mostly decrepit. And I remember finding this area once, and I was able to see the concrete footprint of that substation. There's Howard Mackler, who operated the station till the end. I went over there a couple of years ago, and it's all been redeveloped and you can't find it. So I have a picture of it somewhere. We all have pictures of things somewhere, right? And then we're going to
One-
swing around.
George,
yeah.
sorry, one other comment. Someone we have a comment in the chat stating the Pennsylvania Coal Company was loosely affiliated with the Erie.
It was.
Gravity Railroad connected with the D&H Canal at Hawley, Pennsylvania, and eventually portions of the line were converted from gravity to conventional railroad and became the Wyoming division of the Erie.
It did. In some cases, the Laurel Line was on the former canal, the Gravity Railroad. There were two gravities here. There was the D&H gravity, which ran out of Scranton north, Carbondale, and then it started to go over the mountain. There was also the Pennsylvania Coal Company. So we had two gravities, but only one this far south. There's the Maffett School, as we're looking off of Helen Street. And there's one of the long-term industries here. The switch goes into Sienkiewicz Lumberyard, and you could see that school building. It's being used, but it is so full of trees. It's you wouldn't even recognize this. And Helen Street has been filled in. I have black and white shots of both areas. There was a house on top of this, and the lady was telling me how they wanted to build a house here, and they had to fill it all in. You can see the Lehigh Valley Prospect Breaker Works off in the right up there. And look at that pile of coal. I mean, this was common sight. There's Sienkiewicz. And they did use, as you can see, overhead wire down here. And it was much safer. Now, I looked for that a couple of years ago, and there's a lumberyard, but not Sienkiewicz. Certainly not served by railroad anymore. Then we'll head south. There's that school building, and that's a marker. And we're coming up to Midvale. I know Midvale was where there was a coal miner who worked here at the Prospect Breaker, Lehigh Valley Breaker, and he probably lived across the tracks, and he probably walked the third rail every day. It's a shortcut. And one day he was killed. He wasn't that old, about 38 years old. That's a great shot of a coal breaker, a more modern coal breaker. This thing would burn like so many of them. And that chute is taking coal up from mines. Again, you can't put the breaker atop the mine shaft, even though it seems like it's very easy. That car is heading out onto the Prospect Bridge or trestle. And there's a better shot of it. So that's the Prospect Trestle, Prospect Collier. You can see why it was named that. Trolley buses went under that. And before that, streetcars going up to the Hudson area. And look at all those conveyors of I mean, it was just a very interesting. I thought these things were very interesting. And, my dad didn't, because as a young man, it's like so many people, he would go out and pick coal off the tracks. And sometimes if it was a slope mine or a drift mine, he would walk down in there to get coal to heat the house for free. You wouldn't want to be caught. My uncle said he used to be on top of the hopper cars on a branch, so it wasn't very quick moving. My dad would be down there grabbing the coal he was throwing off. It was very common to see people picking coal even after World War II. There's a great shot of Prospect Colliery and the surrounding ancillary buildings, mining cars. The bridge went over the Jersey Central. I know it went over the Lehigh Valley railroads. Ed said the Erie was down in here somewhere, and it went over Main Street too. I found this slide on eBay and nobody wanted it. Thankfully, I'm very happy because I always wanted a view like that. There's another shot, probably off a dump, taken off a dump. The Susquehanna River is there. all the valley communities on the other side. Exeter would be one, Wyoming would be one, West Pittston was farther off to my right. In that area would have been what was known as the Wyoming Massacre, which was a Revolutionary War battle between Tories and Indians and the Connecticut settlers that were down here in the valley. In this valley also, Pennsylvania settlers would fight the Connecticut settlers in a number of wars, which were finally settled, the boundaries were finally settled by the federal government. There's John Gabriel shot, and his son is alive now and is, I believe, president of the Anthracite Railroads Historic Society. John palled around with Ed Miller and John Endler and a whole bunch of other people here to shoot this area. So there's another. I love this. So I mean, I like to look at this. So I just put this in, but it gives you a lot of different views. Don't forget, Ed's on a bridge. He's on the Wilkes-Barre connecting railroad bridge, and he has walked out kind of over the river to get this shot. So we talk about safety, but so many. That's the Wilkes-Barre connecting. So many pictures that I see in this area of people taking shortcuts on the tracks. This area has all been rebuilt. That has been taken down. This whole area has been changed very much. That bridge, however, with no embankments leading up to it on either side, is still there. And you can go under that bridge on a road and go down in there and take pictures of this Laurel Line bridge that has managed to survive. It's nobody wanted to scrap it. Maybe it wasn't economical. And we head down past yet another breaker the Laurel Line had no access to. Couldn't access Ewan, it didn't access Prospect, and it couldn't access this. Was Lehigh Valley Coal Company as well. None of this is left. You chop your way through here if you even want to see anything. Now, at one point, not just the Laurel Line went through here, but there was the Lehigh Valley Railroad track running along here past Dorrance and up to the Prospect Breaker. And the canal, there was a canal here at one time farther down. And in here at some point, I remember when this wasn't as grown up as it is, I can remember finding some of the brick wall that helped support the canal. There's the Lehigh Valley Railroad. And another lucky eBay win. And we'll get down to North Street. We're in Wilkes-Barre. And remember I said that you can see overhead wire. And Wilkes-Barre did not want third rail in the middle of its city. So it was the third rail change point. And I have seen movies where the trolley pole is put up or taken down by the conductor while the car is moving. As they get into where the third rail is, they yank the pole down, and afterwards, they're where that third rail over. And there was a joint area where both sources of power were there so that you could do this. And they did it on the fly. And we're down to the Wilkes-Barre prison today. And the gas tanks, they did have a spur into the gas works. I've not seen many pictures with tank cars except in the earlier years, but they had a spur in the gas works. And there he is, he's raising the pole while the car is racing along, with this third rail. So doesn't look very safe. Now we're just going to cross North Street, and there were a number of automobile accidents in the papers. You can read about it here. And you can only imagine why. People can't see the Laurel Line trains. The Laurel Line can't see the automobiles. They're probably driving the way they do there. And there's the gas works. In the back is the huge structure, which was the Dorrance Breaker. And then we'll swing around the courthouse. Wilkes-Barre's courthouse is off to my left. We're swinging around to cross River Street. And there's some Lehigh Valley track. And you can see it's not really being used well. But we'll swing around. And at River Street, there was this little shelter. Not a very nice looking thing, but you could stand there or stand inside, and it's sitting on where one of the Lehigh Valley Railroad tracks used to be. You can see that branch is becoming less and less important. And then we're going to run down this area, and there was a canal. This is where the canal ran, the Wilkes-Barre Canal, or Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name of it, but it ran through here. And then the Lehigh Valley had its tracks here. on top of the canal bed. They had to sell, or they did sell land to the Laurel Line in order, and then shifted their tracks a bit. And the Laurel Line really didn't have any business. For all the industry you see, you had to wait till you get down to the end. There was Thomas C. Thomas. There's the trackless trolley. Wilkes-Barre in about 1930, 38 or 40 began replacing streetcars with trackless trolleys. They had the coal supply, you know, they had the ability to produce the power. And so they thought trackless trolleys would work fine. And they had about 11 lines before they had to stop. They were eventually taken over by not National City, but another transit company. There it is. There's the name, Pennsylvania New York Canal and Railroad Company.
One question. How long was the line actually, and how long did the trip take?
It was 19 miles. Took about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the scheduling. They had some expresses in the early years. You're going to make me try to find the schedule now, right? Take a look at the back of this room. It's in there somewhere. About 45 minutes though. Now, what they're doing here, if remember I said there was a warehouse that was located there by a department store. And this was between North Franklin and North Main. You can see the overhead. And it's going to swing over with its half-hour service. It's going to swing over and use the northbound track in both directions. And this spur track will be able to be used as a siding. A little bit of business. There's a 401 switching over at Pennsylvania Avenue. So we're looking down that canal bed right there. You can see the refrigerator cars. There's the furniture company there that they're switching. You can see that there. We'll swing around across Pennsylvania Avenue, and they serve the Swift Meatpacking Company down here. Lehigh Beef was down here at one time, and Thomas C. Thomas, which is around the corner, was a fruit merchant, and they served Thomas C. Thomas. And the refrigerator cars are not on the Laurel Line, they're on the Lehigh Valley Railroad. But now there's their terminal facilities. It was in the early days when they were trying to sell it to another railroad, you know, they advertised this as facilities that you just couldn't possibly duplicate, you know, for this large amount of money. That's not true, of course. On the left is that track was the interchange track. They would switch cars onto that and for the Lehigh Valley to take, and they would pull cars off that were delivered. There was a freight house here, and Swift was here, and they had some of these little side tracks that were basically team tracks. There's the terminal building in the back, and also the Lehigh Valley Railroad Station. Now here we are doing the interchange, inbound car, and cars on the freight siding. There's Lehigh Valley cars on the left, and there's the Laurel Line pulling cars off of the interchange. And we're going to head in. There's a nice shot of Wilson. That was the other company there, Wilson. This was originally the area that freight house. That building was a freight house, and you can see it's long been unused, but the beef packers, Swift and Wilson, are there. Lehigh Beef at this point in the 50s is also long gone. That track was on a switchback, and there was a couple of 2-car, 3-car sidings, and they could have been used in the early days as team tracks. In the later days, you don't see them being used for very much. There's the terminal. It opened about 1904. So the original line went as far as Pittston. Then they opened it as far as Hancock or Plains. And now in 1904, they'll open it here. And there's one terminal track in here, one loop track. You know, there's 1 or 2 sidings, and then a siding over there on the side. Now, what used to be there on the left of this station was a trestle that went up and then had a 90-degree turn. That was the Wilkes-Barre Railway's Georgetown line. And you can see by 52, it's gone. It was abandoned as a streetcar line, replaced by trackless trolley in 1948. Now, there was a line to Dunmore. And this was a kind of a Y, a weird Y. So we're looking up what is now the Central Scranton or Joe Biden Expressway. That spur was served a lumberyard that was there forever, it seemed, even in diesel days. And it caused them to keep the bridge over in Roaring Brook in place, this bridge. This was going to be the original main line to Carbondale. So it was built as a double track, and it was abandoned October 25th, 1945. And so there's a shot heading up what is now the expressway. There's the power plant you can see the shop building, and down below is the bridge over Roaring Brook. And it's coming under this hill going into the Crown Avenue tunnel. 4,750 or so feet. You can do this today. You can drive it today. It's Interstate 81 going into the Central Scranton Expressway. But at this point, the double track has all been lifted, and it is a little single track operation. And we're going to head up to Dunmore, which is about 2.5 miles. This is Naog Park. There's the DL&W Railroad on the right, and right up above that to the right off the picture is Naog Park. This whole area at one time was the dumping grounds for slag from the Lackawanna Iron and Steel Company. And then two of the different stations there, Petersburg, and on the bottom, it's a Naog station on top. Wasn't much business up here, as you can see, and the facilities really reflect that. And then we'll head down into Dunmore here. Off on the top photo, this is flood photo, so you have this picture. It's wonderful. You can see the DL&W where they're rebuilding their line, but look off to the left. Look at that abutment there, okay? The Laurel Line station was just off the picture to the left, and you see it down on the bottom. But that abutment took a bridge, took a freight line, and then it went under the DL&W, and it connected here with the Erie Railroad. And they had an interchange here with the Erie, and they also went up the valley about 1/2 mile to serve what was called Quinn Coal for at least 6 years. So this was a major yard of the Erie at one time, and this building was a major shop, and it constructed a lot of hopper cars, and it constructed a series of cabooses. The bridge you see on the bottom in the back was the Erie Railroad line heading down to Scranton, and it served their station on North Washington Avenue. Now, another industrial thing here was the Manuka branch, and you can see the switchback up here. And when you did the switchback and you went up a little bit on the switchback, that was the Moffett coal. If I had the black and white slides here, Kristen asked that I just show the color for the most part. So it's her fault. But it was a line that served the Moffett coal, and then it was abandoned as coal would happen. There was no more coal. After the war, the Chamber of Commerce wanted some more industry coming into Scranton, and they got this land, which originally was in Lackawanna Township. Later, it was taken over by the city of Scranton, and they built about 3,000 miles of track heading up the hill. And there we have some of the original industries, GE. You can see where that was. Harris Hub and Spring was there. Train Company was in there, I believe, Polarod. And farther down the line was a scrapyard where all 3 Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley locomotives were scrapped. And to this day, you can get back and watch trains come up here. Twice a week, the Delaware Lackawanna comes up here, and it serves 1 or 2 plastic factories. And
Hey,
there's
George,
yeah.
On the previous, or the slide before this one, I think.
I think
two
it was
before.
2 slides ago. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question about a destination sign. Was that a destination sign in the picture?
Before this one.
Wait, where? Here? They never had destination signs that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
Although
I think the question is on
yeah,
the lower. Or
right
above.
here, it may be because, my wonderful eyes, I'm seeing Naog in Petersburg. So that was a destination sign. Yeah. And the main cars never had those. But you had to, because remember I showed you it was a Y operation. It went out to Dunmore, then it wide over to Maple Street, and then it came back in. So that would tell you which way it was going. Yeah, there is a destination sign there. And now something to try to collect, right? In the end, though, they only had 2 cars that operated on the Dunmore line. One was a spare. And you notice they only had steps on one side. They converted those like that because they just really didn't load many people on this line. Okay, yeah, here we are. Okay, here are shots of going up to and switching at the area here that we question. Okay, and I'll let you read it. I'll just read it for you on above there. Okay, so the above, we're coming off the main line, which is located on the right, and we're pushing up that switchback. I'm going to go up a ways, and then I'm going to switch back higher on the hill to the left. This is where I saw those poles, and they had bracket arms. So I knew right away they were streetcars. And you can see the bracket arms up here. And we're heading up the hill on the upper right. And those foundations are from the old Moffett coal breaker. So the original line up here only went this far. And then it would another 3,000 feet where these new industries were. And on the lower left, that's switching what was known as Harris Hub, Bend Spring, and then the bottom at Kane Street, that's the GE plant. And, you know, having seen this, when I went up Kane Street, I knew exactly where I was. And it's a bit more built up, and the tracks are all gone up here. Now, ridership is declining. Certainly, it built up during the war. A lot of people coming from the valley had to go to Wilkes-Barre to do their reporting and processing, and then you brought them back. So it went up. And after 47, as you would imagine, things go down, the loads go down. That's a nasty number, 78%. And they have a fare increase. That doesn't help. They have another increase in 49 and yet another one in 51. Now, remember I mentioned those gold bonds. They're coming due. These debentures, these bonds are coming due. $3 million when they refinanced the company back around 1918 or so. And they didn't know how to get this money. They've applied for Section 77 bankruptcy. They got the court to abandon passenger service, but the receivers didn't want to do that. They really were trying to get somebody to do something with this line. This is around the Butler Breaker. We saw some pictures from here. It's a 1945 shot, but there's a strike, and the receivers know this, that we're going to get rid of at least the passenger service. We'll try to let the freight service survive. And here's a thing from my collection. Don't ask me how I got it, but it's in good shape. And the last trains would run at the end. And here's, so January 1, there'd only be freight trains. Here's the last southbound trip at 10 p.m., December 31st, 52. And there were rail fans here, certainly. John Hennigan was there, and I think Hennigan's over there second from the left. Mike Ravel was in here. He was a real fan. Joseph P. Fitzpatrick, that was interesting because he bought the first ticket that was sold in Pittston when the line opened in 1903. And that's that old fella there with the cane. So a whole bunch of people, conductors, Knapp, Ratchford, they were all old conductors that go back nearly to the beginning. And the freight service continues to run. They will try to run it, and they will run it as an electric line. And it is a somewhat blurry picture because that's what it was. Ed didn't always take classic, beautiful pictures, but you now have only freight service running on this line. And we're crossing Roaring Brook, heading into the Crown Avenue Tunnel. There's another shot from Helen Street. And you can see only one boxcar. I mean, that's not going to provide very much revenue. There's that pile of coal there. That was a typical train. And we're northbound. And we're northbound at Virginia. And you can tell because that switch is leading up to the Manuka Bridge, about 1947 or 8. There's some switching that's going on up there in Manuka. Ed never shot any color pictures in Manuka. There are fan trips. 1950, the end, fan trips would always come up here. And that was the only time you'd see passenger service up here. There's crossing Davis Street. There's a cemetery off to the left. It's actually 5 cemeteries all kind of together, and it's kind of interesting. There's the main line train going north, and that is the Manuka line, the Manuka branch, up here in front of me. And it's a typical, one refrigerator car coming out of Wilkes-Barre in 52. Almost the end of electric service, 3 cars of calm. It was typical. The guys, of course, liked riding in the front, especially on a hot day, and it looks like summer. I saw this one. I'm sorry that I think I have this one before, but here's the crossover, and take a look behind the locomotive. There's the track that went over the hill, as they call it. And I think it was last used in the late teens when they had a major track work reconstruction program in a tunnel. But they still had track that was left that you could park something on right up to the end. Another typical Laurel Line track. It's a good shot of the third rail. You can still see some of the ballast left, that the rock ballast that this was originally laid on.
Hey, George.
Yeah, sure.
Getting another question.
Okay.
Did the 3 interurbans ever have track connections so you could have run from Hazleton to
No.
Carbondale?
No, the Northern Electric came into downtown and it looped. Well, it had its terminal on Wyoming Avenue, the second 100 block of Wyoming Avenue, and it ran in over Scranton Railway. They never had a track connection going over to the Laurel Line. Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton had its station, 3-story elevated station, opposite the Laurel Line station on Pennsylvania Avenue. They came in on their own trestle. I have, seen maps that may have indicated the Laurel Line had a track going over there, but the Laurel Line was on the ground, and the Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton, where they did park both passenger and freight cars, was up on the 3rd floor. I have never seen a really good map yet. I mean, I don't know. You get to be 71. How much research can I do in the later Library of Congress to really see if there was a track connection? So far as I know, there wasn't. Nothing has ever been written about a track connection. They switched down here and they transferred with the Lehigh Valley. That's a typical switching operation. And there we are looking, and there's the engine switching. There's some cars on the Lehigh Valley interchange, and behind the Laurel Line station is the station used by both the Lehigh Valley Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad. There's a Laurel Line boxcar, one of these little, and it was not an interchange service because it still had Archbar trucks. Now, it gets people scared now that the Laurel Line passenger service is no longer running, and they used to have all these trains up and down, and now there's 2 freight trains a day. And at least here in Pittston, you're seeing a northbound train swinging around a curve from that bridge that we saw earlier. They were concerned that people are going to get real careless, and they asked the Laurel Line to put up overhead, which they did in July, and would last about a month. But it made people in Pittston much happier that the 3rd rail was no longer electrified. It's still there, as you see, but it's not electrified anymore. Here's all that undermining in here, and there was a lot of cave-ins down on this line. It's incredible. They had to move track in some cases while there was mines running. I had pulled this out, this is from the black and white portion, but take a look at what's happening between North Avoca and Pittston. For 4 hours, this big hole for 300 feet along the tracks goes in. I mean, it was 10 feet deep, it was 20 feet wide, and that's just one of many, many incidents where this line was affected by mine caves. And this was all Pennsylvania Coal Company mines down here in the Pittston area. Since we mentioned the Pennsylvania Coal Company, here's North Pittston again. Beautiful fall colors. There's another Laurel Line bus. And we're switching at that little coal facility at number 14. And mine conditions were always something that you had to worry about northbound. And they would constantly fill. I mean, there were records which were not complete that talk about having to move cinders in certain areas because you could see it was starting to drop. And as soon as it dropped, they would start filling it in. In a few cases, they bought pillars of coal under their tracks. They certainly bought it under the Scranton station, so they wouldn't have that kind of cave in. Look at the steep grade there. They were switching refrigerator cars from Thomas C. Thomas and Swift in Wilkes-Barre at Pennsylvania Avenue. Another shot of the yard. You can just see it wasn't much of a yard. I'm trying to look across the street. You can't see anymore the 3-story station that eventually would be cut down to 1. So you can't see it right there. And I don't know what that diner is. Somebody asked me about that one time. I need to be older. Here's some of that temporary track though up at Duryea. And they would move it around as they cut this out and reclaimed it. This was a former Hillside Coal Company mine, and then more switching down there. Now they would continue this electric operation until August 19th, 1953. And they planned to run the 2 cranes in the morning and afternoon as they usually did. And the morning train actually ran at 6. It would leave early and it would serve the whole line. Now in the afternoon, they had assigned it an electric motive as well. And somebody noticed there was a newspaper article that, whoa, the trains are done. The electric trains are done today. That really got the railroad worried. They were going to lease an engine from the Dale&W Railroad. And now they were worried about, hey, we're running an electric train in the afternoon. People are going to read this. This is not good. They de-energized the 3rd rail, and the afternoon train was pulled by a diesel. And it was this. They leased this little 44 tonner. And here it is, switching in a very empty Wilkes-Barre station. And this thing was not very powerful, as you probably can guess, particularly, when you're going to go up and down grades. So here it is at Market Street Station in Pittston. 3rd rail still in place. It's de-energized. And when it tried to work this facility, there's the coal dumper dumping coal into the cars, and it's trying to pull, and it had a very difficult time. And I think you can see it. 2 cars were the maximum that this thing could pull, and it kind of slowed things down. So they decided we'll spend a little more money and we'll get one of these. And 357 and 434 are typically what you see. This is that station at North Pittston. The line is being demolished. 1 track was pulled up very quickly, and it was mostly single track then on the way down. And they would periodically have sidings where you needed to get around the train to switch. And this was the Lackawanna, which would eventually buy it about 1956 or so. They did. This was a newer industry down here, mostly related to coal and still the meatpacking plants, which went away one by one. But this was typical. And look at that, all refrigerator cars down in Houston. Houston was near Pittston. And that beautiful double track is all gone. It's being grown over. Even the track they use is pretty weed grown. And then in 1960, I remember this, the Lackawanna merged with the Erie, and they were trying to, combine tracks, get as rid of much duplicate plant as they possibly could. Well, we all know from other pictures, the Erie and the Laurel Line kind of paralleled each other up and down. So they got rid of the Laurel Line 8 or so miles in the middle where Virginia was, and where the Erie was very close behind some trees. They made a connection there. And they came back in and made another connection down around number 14 in Increment. But in the middle, where there was absolutely no business, they saw no need for that. They got rid of the cars. They went up to the New York, Ontario Western Yard in Mayfield, and they sat for a couple of years. This is 54. I think they scrapped these in 57. And that's my only real view of the Laurel Line, because my mother had north of Carbondale, she had a friend, a very good friend, and we would go up to visit Stella Scott's, and we would pass Mayfield Yard. Now, a man named Bauman, John Bauman, was scrapping the Laurel Line. He scrapped a lot of things. There was a lot of stuff up here. including these cars that were very close to the road. And this was the only time I got to see what I would later realize were Laurel Line cars. So there they are, pulling some of that track out in Hughstown. They don't need it anymore. There's a parallel Erie Railroad line there. And then the freight traffic is now run by the Lackawanna and under a subsidiary, the Lackawanna and Wyoming Valley Railway. And look at those numbers, 54, 7,027 carloads. It falls in 55 to just under 7,000 and just under 5,000 in 56. So, you know, some of this stuff is it's just going away, you know. Online traffic, coal stuff, of course, disappears. That's something that'll disappear, and there's not much else. Some furniture, the meat packing plants start to go south. And so all of this was supposed to be rebuilt. When the Dale and W applied for the ownership of the Laurel Line, it was going to rebuild the line. Well, obviously it didn't do that. They abandoned some of it right away. And here we are in the 60s when all that traffic is falling off. You know, even Thomas C. Thomas would shift to truck. And that was a very big shipper of fruit, vegetables. And so this is, this is just one incident. You got heat kinks. Look at the condition of the ties. And then when Wilkes-Barre was flooded by Hurricane Agnes, all the business disappeared. And if I remember correctly, that was 1972. And then a few years later, Conrail enters the picture. And of the many Northeastern railroads taken over, Laurel Line and Lehigh Valley were there. And they realized they could serve some of the remaining industries in Wilkes-Barre. There were none in Scranton at this point, except for that lumberyard. We don't need the tunnel. You know, we don't need much of what's in the middle. We'll serve Scranton and Wilkes-Barre with our existing railroads. Now, there's the Steamtown Yard today. And, you know, I kind of like it when I look at it, because all those buildings on the hill in the back on the left, they're gone. It's nothing but trees. Anybody that's visited Steamtown or Electric City knows that. Look at all of that activity in the railroad yard. It just always surprises me that so many team tracks and a freight house and whatnot. And there's the DL&W station. And as long as that bridge existed, there was still a trolley track on the right-hand side of that. The little building below that bridge, we see the right-of-way crossing Roaring Brook. That was the dispatcher's office for the Laurel Line. And the lumberyard is over there, right up above the bridge. That's closed. And this creek flooded too. And that's what it looks like today. Or at least when I got a hold of this postcard. Obviously, the yard up there is now Steamtown, and it's far more active. The station is there. And a lot of this property is University of Scranton property. This highway complex, of course, is there. A parking lot up there, well, you know, that was the Laurel Line station up there. And the track has been relayed to serve the old shop building, which was the plastics plant. And there it is on the bottom. And it's surrounded by more building today. But if you stand up on the hill to the left off West Webster Avenue, you can clearly see the Laurel Line shop in the middle. There was the bridge. Voca Viaduct stood for years. I used to see that thing all the way into the 70s, and they would gradually dismantle that. Today, there's only one bridge abutment left. The one that you see right here was taken out about 5 years ago. That freight house is still extant. However, you got to look for it because it's surrounded as well by other buildings. And I-81 has destroyed a lot of the right-of-way. Here's the Central Scranton Expressway. You can see that coming in, and that's gonna this whole area is going to change. The highway's coming in there. You see the forlorn Laurel Line shop, which would become a plastics plant there, and one Laurel Line car sitting down, being used as a tool shed in a now very abandoned yard. They took the station down. Look at the inside of that beautiful thing. Beautiful tile, you know, in there. And the radiators and 3 doors. There was actually a lock on that door where the radiator was installed. That was the Laurel Line's local operating headquarters. A lot of the offices, local offices, were upstairs. they did have a New York office. And I know the tiles were this 4-colored mosaic, black, gray, red, and green. The station was used for a while by a local taxi company. They would eventually demolish that. And you would think it's all gone. This is 67, demolishing that station. Well, I used to walk over there and I would walk on the platform. The loop platform was there for many years before the University of Scranton took it. And I used to see this just in the corner of the platform. That's how I know what the colors are. And one day when I was home visiting my parents, I just took a crowbar, walked over, took this stuff. And I have it in my basement today. And about a month or two later, university just demolished all this. I don't think they're going to miss this. So more stuff from my wife to wonder just what the hell is this? The tunnel was very forlorn for a long time. And, you know, if you guys read the Laurel Line, book that two Strasbourg professors published with the help of Edward Miller, you know, it asked in the end, it's already 86, where was there a final chapter to be written on the Laurel Line? And there certainly was, because here we are, is the ghost of the Laurel Line. And here's car 80 coming out of the south end of the tunnel. Electric City Trolley Museum operates their cars here, and twice a week, as I said, the DL Railroad, Delaware Lackawanna Railroad, operated it. I put that in the wrong spot. I apologize, but that's what it looked like in 1980. When I went down there, I didn't want to get in there because there was a lot of briars in there. And, you know, there's snakes out here, and you have no idea what kind. Garter snakes don't bother me. Copperhead might. There is the opening. Ed Miller always used to wonder, he missed riding the Laurel Line. Well, he had a chance to be on this. This was the opening day at the South. And I wandered in here totally. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I come to Scranton, another visit with my parents who are still alive. And there's all these people from Philadelphia that I know there. For all I know, Rich Allman is there. I don't know. And I asked what's going on. And they said, whoa, we got a ride coming through the car, through the tunnel. So I ran around to the south end to get this picture. And Ed Miller is right next to me. And we're both getting the same picture. And then off to the left, they had a really nice spread of food. So I had lunch and I wasn't invited. But if anybody wants to know, there is Ed. And I always dedicate this presentation because it wasn't for Ed and him talking to me about this and getting me interested, you know, this, I don't think I'd be able to do this and share my interest and his interest with you guys. And they have an honor for him today. If you go to the south end of the tunnel, they have named it and actually signed it the Edward S. Miller Memorial Tunnel. You know, he's the chronicler of the Laurel Line, you know, and he lived till he was 90. Sharp as a bell and able to talk about this. So you have the map of the line there, and this wonderful dedication to Ed. And I believe with that, I can try to take more questions, or we can try to look at other slides that are just sitting there.
George,
yeah.
I just wanted to say on behalf of the Electric Railroaders Association, particularly given the last minute nature of your putting this presentation on for us. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. That was a great, very interesting presentation. I have enabled folks to be able to unmute. So if anyone has any comments or questions for George, feel free to jump in now.
Yeah, it's an exceptional presentation, and exceptional in not only its quality and the intelligence and information provided by its presenter, but also that it was a last minute thing.
Yeah,
and usually those don't work out too well, but this one was.
I'll say this. I was very fortunate to have, I put this together, gosh, can't tell you how many years ago, and I have several versions of it, longer, shorter. So I was lucky to have it. I operated trolleys all day today. I was at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum today at 8:30. And, you know, I didn't know about this until about 5. We're putting cars away and I'm thinking, oh, I'll go to a dance tonight. And Kristen is telling me, oh, no, we got this problem. And so I did. I was able to do this, thankfully. And I was very happy to do this for you gentlemen. And, thank you for listening. And, you know,
It's really
Up to me.
wonderful. And I got a taste of what your colleague, your former colleague was, because I have a videotape of his Wilkes-Barre system tape, and it was I've run that thing so many different times because it's so fine, and it reveals the quality of his photography and also his vast knowledge of the area. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I didn't get there until there were trolley buses, but
I remember seeing the trolley buses, and my dad hated all this stuff. We went down to Sansui Park once, which was the park that was on Wilkes-Barre Railway's Nanticoke line, and we went through Pittston. There's no interstate highways, and I can remember seeing the trolley buses, and he wouldn't stop. I mean, he hated trains, and I really think he hated trains because of all the coal he had to pick, you know, along the line to heat the house. I mean, he did a lot of hard work back in those days. Ed Miller, I have to tell you, Ed Miller was the person who taught me how to take pictures with backgrounds. You know, I was started like most of you doing roster shots, and I was down at Ed's house, and you know, that was usually an all-day thing where your mother's called you up at 6 and said, come home. You've been there too long. And I remember commenting on a lot of Ed's pictures, Philadelphia, Scranton. How come the trolley is only a part of it? And he explained about the whole scene. And he changed my way of taking pictures. I always try to take the entire scene now. So
George, looking at
Yeah.
your pictures, they remind me of Western Kentucky. Same type of operation. And they went and built on that stuff down there. And of course, you got houses that are sinking different ways, mine shafts that are collapsing underneath them, and all kind of trouble. So is your good area up in Pennsylvania got the same problem with all subdivisions built on that stuff? Or are they smarter?
had. I don't know right now because when Governor Scranton showed up, you know, he was a local guy, and he took all of these dumps that you saw. We call them the dumps, the calm banks. And they were having some cave-ins, particularly in the west side. People's Coal Company up there was so bad in 1920 or 22, the city closed it down, and that's unusual to take people's jobs away. Well, then there were more cave-ins not too far from my house along Railroad Avenue. And the city went and reopened some of those mines, and engineers were down in there, and they said you could play 5 football games under the city of Scranton, and you might have seen some of those tall buildings there. And Governor Scranton decided, well, here's what we're going to do. 7 layers of mines, 6 of which were flooded. Okay. The other part was collapsing. The upper layers were collapsing. So he took down all those dumps. This is your tax dollars at work, guys. And took them all down. And all over the city, we had openings, and there were hoses, and they were throwing that down as a slurry, water and calm, and it was filling up, and to support all of this stuff underneath. Now, I don't think there was really anything. I haven't heard of anything, although you have to imagine by now, from the 60s now, 60 years, that's probably settling some. It's amazing what has actually stood up without falling in. But Ed remembers telling me he was on his porch one day, and he was a young man. So he was born in 20, so figure 1930. And he remembers a 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl walking across the street. And then all of a sudden the hole opened up and she wasn't there. They never found her. And it was more likely you're going to see postcards from that area of houses that caved in. So it was not uncommon to have that happen.
Okay, that sounds like Western
Not recent.
Kentucky in the 1980s and 1990s where they just went in, I guess it was FEMA, and just bought whole subdivisions because it was like chicken pox, or the pillars were supporting, and the area that wasn't underneath the pillar was just collapsing by 1 to 5 feet. So, yeah.
Well, what they did up in Scranton, when they originally mined, they would leave substantial pillars, and they would mine what they call rooms of coal. And then they would start, as they backed out, they couldn't find any more marketable coal, they would back out, and they would take those pillars out and support them with wood, maybe. And now you have problems where they did leave some pillars. Remember I mentioned the mob got involved in operations in the coal mining area in 1930s. They did that. And they took it all out. So they're the ones that mined under the Susquehanna River, and the river caved in, and 12 people were dead. And, fortunately, there was another engineer down there that knew the way out for the rescue, or maybe more would have gone. It was all, in the end, the mining was very, very, I mean, my dad would use the term shyster, and I have no idea what it means. All I knew it was pretty cheap.
They also did that with the salt mines up around Retzoff, where they eventually, mined the pillars as well and caused subsidence. There is actually a sort of memorial in Stockton. It was on the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and of a whole house that was swallowed up by a mine subsidence with the occupants. It happened at night, and the whole thing. And there is you can see the hole there, and there is a historical marker with an iron gate. And the thing is, my grandmother grew up there, a number 4 patch. And she said this thing, and I was kind of discounted it till I went years later, and there it was. She was absolutely right. The whole family was swallowed up.
You know if the inhabitants made it out? Or was it a pretty deep cave?
Yeah.
I was in Wilkes-Barre in 19.
One of these first. No, this is the eye drop.
Oh, we
Sorry,
lost
Paul.
you.
Paul, I accidentally muted you. And when I meant to mute somebody else, my screen shifted around at the last minute. So Paul Gavkowski.
Yeah, I heard he was in Wilkes-Barre, and then it cut out.
Yep, I'm clicking the ask to unmute button, but I accidentally muted him when my screen jumped around and I was trying to mute somebody else.
You've had a long day, Kristen, down at the museum. I know.
Yeah, incidentally, Kristen, the cars that you have in the background, we have one down here in Georgia at the Duluth Museum. It's one of the ones that was used in the airport down here and then retired. But it's the old Skybus.
Yes, I actually used to work at that museum.
Yeah, that's right. Why am I telling the expert? That's right. Well, it's a wonderful.
Any other questions or comments for George?
Gregory Katz is trying to show something, so I think you need unmuting.
Okay, so this is a book
It's
of
a Morning
Stranger
Sun
Things,
book.
and there is
Yeah.
and there is one picture probably with George showed.
Yeah, that's the Morning Sun's book. I do have a copy of that, and that's trolleys, I think, around Pennsylvania.
Okay,
There are
okay.
there are some Laurel Line pictures in there, and maybe a Wilkes-Barre one.
And this
Right
is
up
a
there.
roller coaster, and
There's the there's the $1 million roller coaster that cost 100,000. And thank you very much. There's Lehigh Valley on the front. Lehigh
I'm
Valley
gonna
was
make one
another
more
very-
comment. You
Sure.
talked about the mining of all the cum that's around that. We have that throughout Kentucky where the we call them the coal washing plants were, your breakers.
Okay, yeah,
And there's been a number of attempts to mine that stuff because there's, like you said, there's all type of good coal there. And every time they get going, good old US EPA shows up
And with that,
and makes all these rules about it. And I'm going there, well, wait a minute, guys, every time it rains, it's leaking acid water out of the thing. So yeah, they start mining it and there is, but eventually you mine it and it's all gone and you don't have the acid water leaking anymore. But at Corbin, Kentucky, there's a huge operation that got shut down. English money. There was another one at Ravenna, Kentucky that got shut down. And one somewhere up by Pikeville that also was trying to clean up those things. So there, you can come down to Kentucky and see those hills that you were showing, George, with all the slate and coal and everything setting in them.
there is still some anthracite mining being done in Schuylkill County. So what's known as the southern anthracite fields, there were 3 coal fields, southern, middle being Hazleton, Shenandoah, and now you're down in Pottsville. You're mining, and I think that stuff maybe, for all I know, some of it's going to England, Europe. Some of it you can get pizza cooked with your anthracite coal. I was doing a show in Pottsville a couple of months ago, and there's a restaurant I really like, and they have an anthracite fired oven, and you can see the bags of Reading Premium Anthracite.
George, isn't or maybe somebody else on this call would know, isn't New Haven style pizza traditionally coal fired?
I don't know. I've never been to New Haven. And there are wood fired and there are coal fired and wood fired is not as hot. I've heard wood fired is about 400 degrees. Anthracite fired pizza is about 800, roughly 800 or 900 degrees. So they warn you, you'll get some charring on your crust, but it's good.
Can I ask the question? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Gary, go ahead.
Am I correct? Am I correct to assume that there are no Laurel Line cars left that survive?
Nothing survived. No.
They're beautiful cars.
1952, 53. Think about what the railfan community was like in the museum community, and who had that kind of money? Where would you put it? What was really a shame is the 401, which was the 1895 freight locomotive, which I think anybody would be happy to have in their museum, but that got dumped too. 1953 or 4, and they scrapped all 3. I don't know if there was any interest. I remember hearing stories here at the Trolley Museum out in Pittsburgh, the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, and how they would struggle to find some cars and struggle to find the money. When they said Pittsburgh Railways wanted $500 for the original 1936 PCC that we had here, nobody could afford that. And
Wow.
That's something like that's really a shame. But it was a money thing. I mean, you had to dig into your pocket to find it and transport it, and where were you going to put it?
Any other questions or comments for George? Well, hearing none, George, thank you very much again. I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of wonderful comments in the chat. I think people really appreciated the program and enjoyed it. Again, on behalf of the ERA and on behalf of myself, apologies for the last minute program change, but I think George, you equaled or bettered what we were going to show anyway. So thank you very much.
I was very happy to do it, and Kristen, I'm glad you gave me a little bit of time.
It's a great show.
For the
Thank you very
record,
much.
George had less than 2 hours to prepare for this presentation. So thank
Wow.
you, George.
Yeah, well, part of that was driving home in traffic. So.
Exactly.
Great. All right. Well, everyone, as a reminder, check the erausa.org website if you're interested in attending the annual meeting. Otherwise, we'll see you here on Zoom for our next regular monthly meeting. And again, stay tuned to the website for details. Everyone have a very good night and stay safe.
Thank you.
And, we'll talk soon.
Well,
Stop my,
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
for everybody listening. Thank you very much.
why'd you stop my video?